Alverstoke Antiviral returns triumphantly to the internet, like Robin Hood returning to the White Cliffs of Dover, except without Robin Hood or the White Cliffs of Dover. Colin and I travel back in time today to chat about a sermon, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before that. We catch up with Peter Davis and we chew over the wonders of the book of Proverbs. My name's Andy and you're watching Alverstoke Antiviral. Well, so Colin, before we do Proverbs, we're going to try a new slot today. It's going to be called the Sunday Re-Chew, because we're going to chew over your talk from Sunday, if you can remember it. So what we're going to do is I have a clock here, and we're going to set 5 minutes on the clock, and then we will see how many questions about this you can answer in 5 minutes. Okay?
Yep.
Are you ready to chew?
Yes.
Then your time starts now. So, Colin, can you remind us what your talk on Sunday was about?
The talk was about living the walk, talking the talk, by living wisely and speaking with grace.
All right. Hopefully that brings back some memories to people. One of the memories for me was the Napoleon illustration. So you talked about how Paul says we should make the most of every opportunity, and opportunities come, particularly when we talk to outsiders. And you have that window in a battle, like Napoleon said, where you have the tide can turn in a very specific moment, and the Bible encourages us to take those opportunities as we share the gospel. So how do you know when you're faced with an opportunity, and what might be a good example of how you could seize an opportunity?
Well, I think we learn something when we miss an opportunity, because we realize I could have said something then, and it's usually because there's something in the back of our mind or something that the other person says that triggers, and you sort of feel almost ready to say something, and then maybe because you're worried about what they think, you back off. And so it's trying to learn from those opportunities so that the next time you have that sense in the back of your mind, oh, I could say this, you actually do say it or ask that question, just to take the conversation on a little bit more. And sometimes people talk rubbish, and that's always a good opportunity to ask a question about, well, why do you believe that? Or ask a question like a previous neighbour said that the 5,000 were fed when people got all their lunch boxes out because they suddenly remembered that they'd brought them with them. I said, that's not what it says at all. It's utter rubbish. And then we unpack that. So there's a couple of opportunities that we face. An example of one was my doctor rang me up just after lockdown, said, oh, a lot of people are feeling very anxious at the moment. How are you doing? And I don't really like giving personal examples, but I didn't know what else to do. But anyway, I said to her, well, I'm not really anxious. I said the worst thing that could happen to me is that I could die. I said, and I know where I'm going because Jesus rose from the dead and he'll give me life because I've trusted him. So I said that. I was quite surprised about that, actually. Wasn't pre-prepared, but the Bible says a lot about anxiety, so it was a sort of opportunity that, I tried to take.
Yeah. And what's a good way of preparing yourself to speak into these opportunities?
So I think all of us need a better present awareness of who we are in Christ and what he's done for us. And also we perhaps should pray regularly for opportunities. I think thankfulness is a part of being prepared, because if we're glad about what God has done and it sort of bubbles up, it will tend to flow out of us and people will receive something because of that. I think we should be careful of having our head full of other things. When you're really busy, or I'm shopping, I've got this to do, I've got that to do. If an opportunity comes up, you may well not spot it because you're so focused on something else. So sometimes strict timetables and other things can restrict us from taking the moment. We need to be prepared to be interrupted. And I put here that some Sunday's messages are sometimes a treasure trove for the next week, out of which we can dig something to speak to somebody about if the opportunity arises. Yeah. So those are a few things.
Now, when we actually talk about speaking, you talked about speaking words which are full of grace, seasoned with salt. That's what Colossians says. And you said the salt might be talking about a sparkle or an engagement or even a humor in terms of the graciousness of how we speak. Who are the best examples you can think of speaking like this?
Well, Jesus is the best example, but we do meet people that have a real heart for other people, who want to listen, who are interested in others. And this graciousness comes from being born again by the Spirit. So it's something of God's character working itself out already in us that then shapes our words. But we do need to be concerned for others. And we need to know that Jesus is worthwhile knowing, absolutely worthwhile knowing, because then we can talk about him. And I think gracious conversation leads us away from ourselves to say, well, we were looking at church, or I was reading the other day, Jesus said such and such. And that really made me sort of think about your situation. So trying to bring him into the conversation. So it's not an easy thing that we find to do. But since he's been the most gracious person ever, we need to try and speak about him. Yeah, don't know if that helps.
Yeah. So what do you think makes a gracious conversationalist? Is it a mix of the attitude and the content and the maybe the choice of words? Because some of us might think we're pretty poor conversationalists, particularly when we're talking about this type of talking.
Yeah, and I put myself in that category as well. But you've asking me the questions. I think I think we need to love people and want the best for them, and deep down know that actually the best thing for a person is to know Jesus Christ. So that hopefully depersonalizes it from how well am I speaking to looking to see, well, if it's appropriate to say something about him and his kindness and generosity. And there are opportunities for that, I think, that if we weren't sometimes so full of ourselves, we would take.
Brilliant. Colin, I think we are over 5 minutes, so thank you very much.
That's all right.
That was a good re-chew of Sunday. And watch this space for more of those in the future, depending on whatever you're going to say this Sunday, which I don't know what you're going to say this Sunday. Maybe you don't either.
Living obituaries.
Living obituaries. Oh. Intriguing. Well, we are now joined with a special guest who many of us may not have seen for a while, but he's still here and he's very much alive and kicking and glad to see us. So, Peter, it's good to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, I think. Well, I've had a bit of a funny old time health-wise lately. My blood pressure went sky high, went up over 200 because my doctor took me off of the blood pressure tablet, and they put me back on it. So I'm now feeling a bit more back to normal again. But apart from that, yeah, we're fine. Yeah, we're okay.
Good. Yeah. So, Peter, I'm sure people will be wondering at home, what does a week in the life of Peter and Jean look like in this time?
Okay. Basically, when you're retired, you don't have a routine as such, although I think it's a good idea to have some sort of a routine. And, you know, if you sort of get up late in the morning, it doesn't matter anymore. If you fancy going off on a bus somewhere, that's fine. If you don't, you stay at home. It's quite different. And if you're not careful, I think it's very easy to just sit and vegetate. And I'm not sure that that's what I ever want to do until, you know, all the while I have strength, you know. I mean, before we moved down into the flat, I used to have my little workshop and make wooden toys for children, which were very, you know, acceptable to people. Now I do my mosaics, and you know, and that's me. That keeps me occupied. So that's basically a week. We, you know, under normal circumstances, our week would involve visiting other people, Christian or non-Christian, friends that we've made in gospel, and that's about it, really. Holidays, of course, yeah.
And holidays, yes.
And holidays, oh yes. From all that relaxing, you definitely need a holiday.
Yeah. So, have you been able to get out and about in Gosport?
What, you mean recently, or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yes, we can. I mean, we're very fortunate in that we just walk out of the flat, we're on the promenade, and you're up the high street, and it's all very easy to get to. So yeah, and I try and walk as much as I can. You know, do 2 or 3 miles a day minimum, sort of thing. So you know, that's, yeah, it's okay.
It's pretty good going 2 or 3 miles. That's probably more than I'm doing.
I don't know. It's well, I've got my app on the phone, and it tells me I've done 3 miles. How it comes to measure that, I do not know. But there we are. That's what it tells me, so I believe it. You've got to believe your app, haven't you? For goodness sake, yeah.
Trust in technology. Yes. Okay. Peter, what do you think generally about the spiritual challenges of our situation, where we're not quite in lockdown, but we're in a period of ongoing uncertainty, ongoing restrictions on social gathering, limits on how much of church we can do together?
Yeah. It's I think, well, it is an unprecedented time we're going through. That's for absolutely sure. But I find, as an older person, I mean, we had a church meeting the other day, and one of the things that was talked about was coming back to church. And if you're over 70, we're not sure that you ought to be coming out. And I thought, hang on a bit, I'm over 70, well over 70, and I still want to get back in fellowship with my Christian brothers and sisters. So I was thinking a bit about that. One of my and Jean's big prayer items at the moment is praying for the elders and leaders for wisdom and guidance and how to do things properly, and still be able to worship the Lord together in some way. I certainly missed that, and it'll be great to get back to a sort of a normality in terms of that sort of thing in church life.
Yeah, I think if we didn't miss church, I think that would be a concerning thing, wouldn't it? Because
yes, it would.
God
Very
gives
much
us
so.
means of growth in our spiritual lives. He gives us each other. He gives us His word. He gives us prayer as well, where we can talk to Him. And you know, if I heard someone say recently that, you know, if the Bible is true, then I would expect a lack of being able to sing with Christians, a lack of being able to meet with Christians, a lack of being able to have the Lord's Supper, and so on, and a lack of communal prayer and things like that, to damage my spiritual health, or to certainly not cause me to grow. Do you think those are things we need to watch out for as Christians?
I think we need to be watching out, but I would question whether it would stop you growing. I mean, there are many Christians in the world that are really close to the Lord and yet don't have fellowship with other Christians due to maybe persecution from the government, due to ill health, due to whatever. I mean, obviously, fellowship with other people, other Christians, is absolutely vital, because that's, you know, one of the things that the early apostles said. You know, they had fellowship with each other, breaking of bread and prayers and that sort of thing. Yes, I mean, obviously it is important, but what is important is to remember that we are walking with Jesus. He's with me all the time. He never lets me go, and I have Him. When all else goes, I have Jesus, and that's what's important, I think.
Yeah. And sometimes,
But I still want to come back to church.
yes,
Sorry,
I'd also want to
carry
come
on.
back to church. Yeah, but sometimes, believers do go through tough times, and Paul ends up in strange places in the mission field where he's
Yeah,
miles away from people.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe this is one of those seasons where it's a challenging time, but it's also it can be an arena for growth and actually relying on Jesus.
Yeah. Well, there we are. I mean, I found that recently, especially when in the church, I found I'm now getting older. I used to, before the lockdown, go to the Tuesday night where the musicians and worship leaders and that all gathered together, and I suddenly thought, I've got to hand over. I haven't got to sort of be doing the playing of the piano or the this, that, or the. I've got to hand over and hand it on to younger Christians, just as when I was a young Christian, people gave me the opportunity to do things for the Lord. And it's very easy to think, well, I've done that all my life. Why can't I do it now? And I remember sharing this with Colin, but I said to the Lord, can you please give me a word for this, Lord, please? And he did. And if you don't mind, I will read it to you. And it's just a few verses in Psalm 92, verse 12. The righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon planted in the house of the Lord. They will flourish in the courts of our God. They will still bear fruit in old age. They will still stay fresh and green, proclaiming the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no wickedness in him. That they will still bear fruit in old age. And the Lord said to me, Peter, you might not be doing the things you did when you were 30, 35, but you will still be bearing fruit. And I am looking out now to see where the fruit is coming from and going to. So that's the little word the Lord gave me.
That's really helpful. Yes, because one way of looking at it is that your ministry changes, as you go through different stages in life. Just as you become a parent, your ministry changes to some extent, and so on. And if you retire in older years, your ministry changes, but it doesn't mean that you don't have a ministry, and it doesn't mean that you can't be used by God for the gospel.
No. And that's what I've got to look out for. It's not a case of, this church won't get on very well if I'm not involved. I mean, that's not what serving the Lord's about. Serving the Lord is doing what he wants you to do. And, he's the one who guides us and walks with us and enables us to bear fruit. And I don't know what that fruit is. It could be something totally different from what I was doing when I was a young man. And it will be, no question about that. So I'm anxious, Lord, please, will you help me to bear fruit for you?
Thanks, Peter. That's really encouraging. Well, it's lovely to touch base with you and hear how you've been doing. So can people catch you on coffee rooms and things like that?
Well, we haven't been doing coffee room. I mean, as you know from the way in which you've had to sort of push me along, Zoom is not one of my top things, which is totally ludicrous, because when I was a teacher, my job was physics and chemistry mainly. I went over to RE after a while, but that's a different story. And I was sort of in charge of reporting and IT, and not in charge, but I was involved in it. And now I'm sort of thinking, all these guys are 15 years ahead of me. I need to know how to do Zoom. I know Andy Bruno's the guy, and I think, what's up with me? I was in technology. It's amazing how it's changed in 16 years,
Well, I think you're doing really well.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. It's good of you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good to see you, Peter.
Yeah, good to see you, Andy, as well. Thanks very much indeed. God bless you. And God bless all of you elders as you seek to serve the Lord in keeping the fellowship going.
Thank you. Well, now we are going to look at the book of Proverbs in the Old Testament, the great book of Proverbs. And you might have seen there's a movie from back in the day called Rocky. And there's one called Rocky 3. And I'm just going to share this. And there's this character, Clubber Lang, his name is. And his catchphrase is when they ask him about his boxing, he said, and they ask him about Rocky, his enemy, he says, no, I don't hate Balboa, but I pity the fool. I pity the fool. And that is a key phrase for the book of Proverbs, especially this idea of a fool. Have you ever considered that someone might look at your life and say, I pity the fool? Have you ever wondered if you're on the right path, if you're any good at living, actually? Have you ever had one of those moments, maybe you have, Colin, where you've been going through life and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, actually, maybe I'm not very good at this.
I've had a few of those.
Yeah.
Quite a few.
Every now and then.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of us might feel we've got it all sus, but many of us might think, actually, I don't really know. I'm sort of feeling my way, and maybe I'm on a foolish path. I saw a video not too long ago of entitled "Why I Don't Do Deep Sea Fishing from a Kayak Anymore," and it had footage of a guy who had gone deep sea fishing in a kayak and was fending off hammerhead sharks with his paddle, and he looked enormously vulnerable. And you think that's so foolish. Why would he do that? Doesn't he understand? But that's the point, isn't it? Some paths in life are better to tread than others, and wiser to tread than others, and some lead to foolish outcomes. And that's why there's such an industry around doing XYZ for dummies, or self-help, and trying to guide us through a wise path in life. How do we make sense of this, and how does the Bible speak into this? Well, the answer really is the book of Proverbs in the Old Testament, because the Bible offers a unique perspective through Proverbs and wisdom books like it. And it says, yes, there are foolish paths in life that are pitiable. I pity the fool. And yet at the same time, there is also a wise path. But the interesting thing is the Bible's perspective on what is wise and what is foolish is not simply about behavior and technique. It's actually about attitude, as we will see. And the invitation of the book of Proverbs is to come and listen to the wisdom of King Solomon, the wisest king of the Old Testament, who had God-given wisdom, who was so famous all the nations came streaming to him for his wisdom. And here's how it starts in Proverbs. Now, Colin, are you able to read that out for us?
Yep. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance, for understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction.
Thank you. So this is how the book of Proverbs starts, and you can see right away Solomon is there. He's up there in verse 1, because this is mostly a collection of his wisdom. There are other wisdom collections as well within the book of Proverbs, but most of it is Solomonic. And you can see the purpose of it in verse 2. The book is all about gaining wisdom and instruction, understanding. And look at down verse 4, and you can see who it's addressed to. It's for giving prudence to those who are simple. And that character there, the simple, is a key character in Proverbs. It's not the righteous, it's not the wicked, it's not the wise, it's not the fool. Proverbs loves these pairings, but it's the person in the middle, the simple, the young, the person who could go either way if they will listen. And here is the call, not only verse 5, to let the wise listen and add to their learning, but also to get the simple wise and to help them choose a wise path. And in verse 7, that's the thesis statement that sets out the choice. You can choose your path. There's the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and there's fools despise wisdom and instruction. Choose your path, wise or fool. And what is the difference in verse 7 between a wise person and a fool? Well, the difference is what they seem to do with knowledge or wisdom. Because fools despise wisdom and instruction, apparently. But it seems those who are wise begin to get it in the first half of verse 7. And how do they begin to become wise? How do they begin to know the right way to live? Well, it's to do with not an attitude, no, not a behavior, but an attitude. Can you see that? It's not a technique. It's not so much a skill set. It's not even quite information. It's an attitude. It's a fear. The fear of the Lord. It's a posture of the heart, a posture that's not so much terror, but more reverence, awe, humility. It's a posture that lets God be God and King over us. And it's a posture of reliance and dependence on him. And it starts in the heart. It doesn't start with outward behavior and know-how and streetwise sage advice. It starts with a posture of the heart. What is your attitude to the Lord? Do you fear the Lord? And this is what Proverbs says. It seems to say that actually it's about the heart and the attitude of your heart. Here we go, verse 5 of Proverbs chapter 3. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. Verse 7. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord. It's the fear of the Lord in your heart that matters. Verse 23 of chapter 4. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. I wonder how many people would say they have guarded hearts, whether they keep watch over their hearts or whether their hearts run wild and do whatever they want. 14:27, the fear of the Lord, this attitude, is a fountain of life, turning a person from the snares of death. And this is the promise. Well, it's not a promise exactly, but it's the assumption of Proverbs. The assumption of Proverbs is that if we are wise, if we will fear the Lord, and therefore that is the beginning of knowledge, that will lead us on this path to being wise and living wisely, then that results in good results. The fountain of life, turning a person from the snares of death. So it's about the heart, and it's about how we respond to God. The fear of the Lord is not just a wisdom term. It's also in other books in the Bible. It's in Deuteronomy massively. But whereas the history and the law tell the story of God's mighty acts and teach us to fear him through introducing us to him in Israel's history, Proverbs teaches us to fear the Lord by coming in through the entry point of everyday life and looking at behavior and looking at situations and looking at people you might meet, situations you might be in, and say, what does it mean to fear the Lord in this situation? And that's how the book of Proverbs works. It's trying to get us to fear the Lord, so we'll benefit from that. The first 9 chapters are mostly rhetorical speeches, designed first of all to win the listener, to get the simple interested. Because if we're not listening, if we don't want to learn, we're not going to learn. Perhaps you know that from a school context, that those who don't want to learn and don't want to listen won't learn because they won't listen. And the call of Proverbs 1-9 especially is listen to Lady Wisdom, because wisdom is personified as a woman who invites people to listen to her. This is Proverbs chapter 8, 32 onwards. And now, O sons, listen to me. Blessed are those who keep my ways. Hear instruction and be wise, and do not neglect it. Blessed is the one who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, waiting behind my doors. For whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. But he who fails to find me injures himself. All who hate me love death. It's a fairly strong pitch, isn't it? But that is the claim of Proverbs. Listen to lazy wisdom, because listening to wisdom and learning to fear the Lord is the path to life. And fools won't listen, sadly. We're told often in Proverbs about how fools don't respond to correction and will not heed advice. There's one proverb that says, do not speak to fools, Proverbs 23:9, for they will scorn your prudent words. Because there's a danger of sins hardening in our hearts, preventing us from listening to the truth of how we should live. But the call is for the simple, if we can listen, and as long as we can listen, to listen, and therefore to learn from Lady Wisdom. And after the first 9 chapters, the bulk of Proverbs, chapter 10 onwards, is a massive collection of many, many proverbs covering many areas of life. And I'm going to read these out to you. The variety of pencils here is trying to reflect the variety of topics, because it changes many parts of life. I've done a list. There's work ethics, parents, money, hunger, alcohol, righteousness versus wickedness, parental discipline, speech, hate versus love, sluggards, the future, honesty, pride versus humility, morals, how people impact their friends and neighbors, gossip, kind-heartedness, marriage, God's control over events, generosity, friendship, emotions, quick tempers, kingship, servanthood, age, patience, quarrels, justice, understanding things, treatment of the poor, skills, gluttony, stinginess, encroachment, listening, deceit, envy, joy, adultery, mockers, saving lives, thieves, gloating, taking revenge, betrayal, guilt, overstaying your welcome, insensitivity, enemy love, giving in, self-control, cursing wrongly, whether you honor a fool or rebuke a fool or hire a fool, being wise in your own eyes, having a bad heart behind nice words, being boastful, praising things, having wise children, recklessness, protection, boldness, whether fools can be corrected or not, hiding sin, flattery, self-reliance, bribery, bloodthirstiness, rage versus calm, pampering, fear of what people think, slander, love, power dynamics, size, and security. Woo! That was a lot, wasn't it?
Yeah, just about covers it all.
You probably think of ones like I've missed if you read through the book. And that would be a great thing to do, by the way, to read through the book and get a sense of the variety of ways fearing the Lord will impact your life and how it applies to all these situations. And the call of this book is, if we will listen to Lady Wisdom and fear the Lord, then that is the path to be on. That is the wise path, and that is the path to life. Now, we have some questions to address, don't we, Colin? I've got the slide for that. Ask me questions, fool.
One of those questions was, are the Proverbs 100% true all the time? So, for example, the fear of the Lord adds length to life, but the years of the wicked are cut short. Is that always the case, for instance, along with all the other statements like it in the book?
That's a good question, isn't it? Because we'd expect, if that were true in 100% of cases, that all the oldest people in the world would be Christians, and Christians would never die young. And yet, of course, Jesus died aged 33. So we've got an issue there. And to answer that question, the answer is really about what Proverbs are. They're not laws, and they're not exactly promises. They're not predictions like in the prophets, and they're not saying in every single circumstance the fear of the Lord makes you live longer. I'm sure we can think of counterexamples. They're general statements. They're wisdom statements about the way the world generally works. Sometimes they're observational, based on I've walked past a sluggard's field and I've seen it's like this, therefore don't be a sluggard. At other times they ask us to believe them in faith, like the general claim that fearing Lord is the path to life, and that he who finds me finds life. That's what Lady Wisdom says. And the author seems aware that these things in the here and now on the ground won't cash out automatically 100% of the time. So, for instance, does Proverbs say we should answer a fool according to his folly? And the answer is yes and no, because Proverbs 26:4, do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him. Next verse, answer a fool according to his folly, or else he will be wise in his own eyes. Which is it? Well, it's both, because these are general wisdom statements about the way the world generally works, and there will be times when it is wise to answer a fool on his own terms, and there will be times when that is a waste of time. And life is complicated, and there will be times for all of these things. And so, yeah, beware of trying to cling on to Proverbs as if they are the promises of God that will cash out 100% time in the here and now. That said, the general claim that the path of wisdom leads to life is a guarantee that we are expected to take on faith, and it is a promise that will cash out in eternity. Because from the perspective of eternity, when we're raised and living eternal life with Jesus, we'll look back and think, well, I guess the fear of the Lord was the path to life and does add length to life, because we're now enjoying eternal life with God in the same way that it's true for Jesus. Sure, his life was cut short when he was young, but now he has indestructible life, Hebrews tells us. And so from the perspective of eternity, the central message, the Proverbs says that the wise life leads to blessing and to life and so on. That is true in the light of eternity. Beware of insisting it must be true here and now in the present. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that covers it. People could always email you if they haven't got it. Yeah. And then second question we pondered was about grace and works in Proverbs, because it can sound a little bit like, if you fear the Lord, if you shun evil, then you will receive blessings from God, which can almost seem like you'll earn his favor if you're a good boy. How do you treat those two things, two aspects?
Yeah, it can be like that. And there, it's really important to remember three things. Number one, yes, Proverbs does set up the expectation of blessings for wise living and judgment for sin. So it says the earnings of the wicked are sin and death, Proverbs 10:16. However, Proverbs also teaches us to expect that no one is perfectly wise and righteous. So Proverbs 20 verse 9 says, who can say, I have kept my heart pure, I am clean and without sin? The point being, all have sinned. The point being, none of us are wise perfectly, and none of us live this out as we should, and none of us fear the Lord as we should. So in the same way that Romans tells us when we sin in chapter 1, that though we thought we were wise, we claimed to be wise, but we actually became fools when we sinned and replaced God. In the same way, sin is foolishness. And therefore, all of us spiritually are foolish. And so no one has a right to claim the full blessings of life that wisdom offers. And the message of the gospel, of course, is that Jesus Christ came and was treated like a fool and suffered the fate of a fool as he died on the cross and was ridiculed for that. And yet, of course, through believing this foolish message of the cross, we can be saved and we can be forgiven and treated as if we were wise, as if we'd always lived wisely. And fools can learn to become wise and respond to Jesus. And this is the third point. So number one, yes, there is that framework. Number two, we can't be wise, and Jesus died for us to save us. Third one, by the Spirit, now we can come back to Proverbs and we can learn to become wise. We can learn to fear the Lord as forgiven people. And this is why it's not works to follow Proverbs, because the fear of the Lord is an attitude. It's a heart attitude, and in there is faith. Part of that is trusting God. And it's that empty-handed faith through which we are saved. It's by grace through faith. And faith is there in fearing the Lord. And so it's by that we are actually saved. And don't confuse that with the works that then flow out of that and form the wise life. They are distinct. And the call of Proverbs is to remember it's about the posture of the heart. And if we will have this heart, trusting Jesus, trusting God, and looking to him for forgiveness and putting our faith that following him is the wise thing and is the wise path to life, then that will cash out in many behaviors. And that's why we should live wisely. Does that sort of add up, Colin?
Yeah, that adds up. Thank
Great.
you.
Are you feeling wise?
Don't know. Time will tell.
Wise answer. Wise answer. Well, thank you very much for tuning in, everyone. All that remains to be said is stay close to Jesus.
And wash your hands. I was washing them just down here. Good.